Now, the Nigerian Senator Ekweremadu, his wife, and a doctor have all been jailed for their roles in an organ trafficking plot after bringing a man to the UK from Lagos. Ekweremadu was sentenced to 9 years and 8 months, while his wife Beatrice was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months. His doctor was handed a 10-year jail term. The Old Bailey Court in London heard how Ekweremadu and his wife wanted a new kidney for their 25-year-old daughter, Sonia. The couple and Dr. Obinna Obeta were previously convicted of conspiring to exploit the man. It's said to be the first of such case tried under Britain's modern slavery laws.
Arise correspondent Lakpe Olarinoye was in court for the sentencing and spoke to us earlier.
It's about 11 o'clock. The accounts of the person at the center of this case, that's the young man who had his organs allegedly was being plotted to be harvested. His accounts were read out, and some staggering things that he mentioned. He alleged that he was starved. He wasn't given any money to go to school. He was promised a life of work and going to school, all of which he didn't. He was staying with this medical middleman, Dr. Obinna Obeta, who he claims didn't treat him to the standard in which he was told he was going to be treated. Hence why he ran to that police station in Surrey, where this investigation into this alleged plot took place and began to unravel. Now, later on, we heard from the prosecution, who made quite some damning statements against the three defendants. And of course, we heard a lot of mitigating circumstances, of which, by the way, Charles, includes a lot of those letters written by the Nigerian political space, including former President Obasanjo, as well as current Speaker of the House, Femi Gbajabiamila, who were writing good character references for Mr. Ekweremadu. Those were taken into account when the judge was sentencing. When that took place, it was very swift. The judge outlined the reasons why, but insisted that all three parties were very much culpable and that they were going to follow the human trafficking sentencing guidelines. And so that's why those three sentences, which at the beginning was 10 years to Mr. Ekweremadu and Mr. Obeta, and then, of course, it was meant to be 6 years for Mrs. Ekweremadu, after taking into considerations those mitigating circumstances, particularly the case of their daughter, Sonia, who's chronically ill. Those were then reduced and adjusted. Mr. Ekweremadu is now currently serving a sentence of 9 years and 8 months, of which he will serve 2/3 of that. Again, quite shocking considering typically you would serve half. He said to serve 2/3. Dr. Obinna Obeta has actually got the highest sentence out of the three, of 10 years and 6 months. And of course, Mrs. Beatrice has gotten 4 years and 8 months. And that's specifically because of her daughter, who the judge described as needing the presence of her mother. And all in all, they will continue their parole. They'll be eligible for parole and continue the rest of their sentences upon release, which could, by the way, Charles, as you know, have very, very stringent and strict rules and regulations about what they can and can't do following that release in many years to come.
Right. With us here in the studio is Arise analyst Frank Tietie, who is a lawyer, to help us understand what, the technicalities really that nailed the Ekweremadus. What do you make of this conviction? I mean, in spite of the pleas for leniency from ECOWAS, former President Olusegun Obasanjo, Nigeria's legislature also weighed in on the matter. Do you think this was heavy considering the circumstances?
It was unnecessarily heavy against Senator Ekweremadu, considering that good character evidence was substantially brought up, and which some of us consider that the court didn't, this court in its sentencing did not, apply appropriately. The most culpable person here is the doctor. And that was manifestly expressed even by the judge in course of sentencing. To punish Ekweremadu because of his high standing and the expectation that he ought to have known better, it's not sufficient. And I think that with the level or the quality of representations that were made to the court, including that of former President Olusegun Obasanjo, the many bishops, and to think of the good character of Ekweremadu himself, I think he deserved a much more reduced sentencing that he got today. The court, like I said in previous encounter, that it was a huge mistake to have, on Ekwerimadu's part, to have allowed this, the matter to have gone on trial in a high court, an equivalent of a high court, when he could have pleaded guilty and then received a summary trial and then would have got a far less sentence, maybe 3 years or less, and then which it could have also been having an option of fine. In this case, I wonder why he didn't see it coming. Perhaps the fact that the Nigerian government, an agency of the Nigerian government, had written to that same court to oppose his bail application. I believe if Ekweremadu was on bail in course of this trial, he would have taken a better decision. To think that the Nigerian authorities are now spiritedly running to save him from proper sentencing. He has already been convicted long before now.
Too little, too late?
Yes, not only too late, but it shows how much breakdown and lack of following proper protocol can affect Nigeria's interest. There was an agency of the Nigerian government, that an anti-corruption agency of the Nigerian government, already communicating with the court, opposing Ekweremadu, sending a very bad signal about him.
Well, we're saying
if that agency had followed the protocol of allowing the communication to go through the Foreign Affairs Ministry, it perhaps wouldn't have gone. So we are now seeing representation from some of our highest individuals, like Obasanjo and the Attorney General of the Federation, being not properly applied by the court. The courts only, give it a whitewash, but never indeed applied them, and that's a bit unfortunate for Ekweremadu.
Let's quickly bring in some precedent here and some other things that had happened in times past. You remember the case of the young lady who was on death row in Saudi Arabia, and how the Nigerian government waded in and she finally got a second chance. So now we have to go back. Do you think that the government of Nigeria didn't come through for the Ekweremadus?
Oh yes, we've passed that stage. The government had made its mistake. Nigerians bemoaned and decried the Ekweremadu's abandonment. I remember in my previous analysis where I had made that comparison and just opposing the situation if it was reversed and it was an American senator that was having such problems in Nigeria, or a British member of parliament that was having such problems in Nigeria, we would have seen a whole lot of diplomatic muscles being flexed by these countries. But in the case of Nigeria, just like one author opined, that Ekweremadu was thrown under the bus by his own country. But after the backlash of criticisms against the government of President Muhammadu Buhari in the way he abandoned Ekweremadu, we saw a U-turn in this procedure for sentencing, which
you say is too little too late. Sorry, I'm jumping in here because I'm trying to see what we can do before we let you go. Looking at the Modern Slavery Act of 2015, and he's the first victim, the Ekweremadus, to fall on that act. And specifically, you see that human trafficking is just number 2 there, and so explicit. So what are the lessons here for someone who is a lawyer, who is also a lawmaker, not to have been able to see this?
Ekweremadu was in a very difficult situation. Ekweremadu never met all of these persons, and he relied so much mistakenly on a certain Dr. Obinna Obeta, who could have told him the proper thing. He relied. The man made representations to him that this is a thing that I've done. And you should know what it means to be a medical doctor in the United Kingdom. It's a person it's the kind of personality you wouldn't doubt his word. Again, sadly, I believe the court did not also consider that Ekweremadu had a high level of reasonable belief that what he was doing was legal. But again, the mistake had been that he allowed it to go through all the trial.
Right.
If you remember the case of former Governor James Ibori, he didn't bother to, he had smart lawyers, and he didn't bother to argue with them because he had a government at home that at that time was facing some political turmoil. He didn't have a direction. He knew he wasn't going to get support from the government at that time. He simply pleaded guilty. And again, you saw the lawyers didn't end it there. They still went on to probe, and in course of a review by the Met Police, his conviction was actually overturned, and was released. You know, so I think it's not yet over for Ekweremadu. Okay. There's room for appeal.
I was going to ask that.
But the appeal process in the UK may be slightly different for us. You could appeal the conviction, which is based on law and facts combined. You could also appeal the sentence. In my own case, I think that he should appeal the sentence. I think the sentence is unnecessarily harsh. It's clear, manifestly clear, that the Crown Prosecution Service wanted to use Ekweremadu as a scapegoat. The UK authorities wanted to showcase to the world that they are better and purer in terms of modern slavery. I mean, being against modern slavery. All of these are factors that when you go on appeal,
and showing that everyone is
and then you also consider that with the heavy weight of character evidence that was in favor of Ekweremadu, would we consider that the court was proper in also just reducing the sentence by a few months and then asking him to be in custody for two-thirds of that time? I think that the sentencing was unnecessarily harsh, and we're taking advantage of an unfortunate decision that Ekweremadu made. I believe that Ekweremadu could not in any way have escaped this. We also don't have to forget the victim, because oftentimes in analysis we've been criticized that what about the victim that was deceived, was coerced, was planned to be exploited?
Well, some Nigerians are already reacting, saying if it was in Nigeria, the young man in question would have been behind bars. Any lessons for those politically exposed and, the privileged persons in Nigeria? Very quickly, in 30 seconds.
Oh yes, indeed, a lot. Because at first, this court of first instance was mindful to send a message across to them that all of those many pleas for clemency or for mitigation of the sentence to be applied to him, the court took advantage of it by saying, look, we are going to punish him hard so that you will know that you don't use your privileged positions to deal with it. But again, I think the court was unfair in not applying the weight of character evidence that favored Ekweremadu.
Frank Tietie, thank you as always.